Welcome to What is Going On for new thought from the edge of Om. Each week on OMTimes' flagship radio show, veteran broadcaster, author, and media consultant Sandie Sedgbeer conducts thought-provoking interviews with inspirational authors, artists, musicians, scientists, speakers, and filmmakers who are working at the point where spirituality and science meet consciousness at the very edge of Om. Here is your host, Sandie Sedgbeer.
Hello. Tonight's show is, in my opinion, one of the most important shows that I think I've ever done in terms of understanding how humanity evolves and what is happening to our world in this time of unprecedented global crisis. If you're concerned about the coronavirus, if you're worried about the prospect of a financial recession, if you're appalled and perplexed by the sudden surge in violence, racism, paranoia, fear and division, stay tuned. By the time we reach the end of this show, you might just have a new view on what the underlying reasons for this crisis may be in a higher perspective and how we are best to relate to it. Johan Calleman is a scientist with a PhD in biology from the University of Stockholm, a former senior researcher of environmental health at the University of Washington in Seattle, and expert on chemical carcinogens for the World Health Organization. He's a recognized world authority on the Mayan calendar. He's written 7 books on this topic, the 2 latest of which are The 9 Waves of Creation and Quantum Science of Psychedelics, The Pineal Gland, Multidimensional Reality and Mayan Cosmology, published just 3 months ago. Dr. Johan Calleman joins me now to discuss how the Mayan calendar illustrates how the rise and fall of civilizations occurs in alignment with precisely timed shifts in human consciousness and offers us an alternative view of the coronavirus, the coming financial challenges, the current rise in authoritarianism, and the end of everything that we once thought of as normal. Dr. Johan Calleman, welcome.
Oh, thank you so much, Sandie. Great to be on your show.
Yes, we've had a few conversations over the years and they're always absolutely fascinating. And I am so happy to have just read your 3rd in this trilogy that you've written, which is just really, certainly got my attention. So you've studied the Mayan calendar for over 40 years, and in your book, The 9 Waves of Creation, you write about the 3 alternative explanations to the rise of human civilizations. I think it would be helpful for our listeners if you could lay some foundations for what is to follow with a very brief outline of what the first 2 are and the 3rd alternative that you propose.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. So this is a topic that has been quite hotly debated over, I would say, maybe the 20 or 30 past years. Why did civilization arise on our planet? And there are a couple of suggestions that have been made. One is quite common, and I think Graham Hancock is probably the most prominent representative of it, is the idea that it was some kind of an earlier lost civilization from which all the other civilizations have emerged. A second one is the idea that there were extraterrestrials coming to our planet and telling people how to create civilizations and build pyramids and so forth. And then you should also add the more mainstream version, which is really to say that, well, people just learned new things at some point in time, and that's what gave rise to civilization. My own explanation is completely different. It is that we are under the influence of creation waves. We're downloading creation waves from the cosmic center. And this is an idea that has its origin in ancient Mayan thought. And they describe, actually, that at the time 3115 BC, when their so-called long count began, they describe what you might call a cosmic quantum state that was initiated at that point in time. And then we can say that at that particular time, before that particular time, there are no civilizations. And after that particular time, there are the Egyptian, Sumerian, and Indus Valley civilizations. At that particular time, people start to build pyramids in as far distant places as Peru and Mongolia. And the whole point with this Mayan idea that there is a cosmic wave that endows us with a new way of thinking is that the result of that would be that these changes would occur in principle all over the planet simultaneously. Not everywhere would there be the actual conditions that would allow for a high civilization to emerge. But we don't find anything before that. There are, you might find up until 10,000 years ago, you will find an occasional megalithic monument, but you don't find civilizations. And I believe as a scientist that if we are to understand these matters, we have to base ourselves on what we actually know and find and not sort of get lost in fantasies about things for which there is no proof. But this then opens up for a whole new way of looking at ourselves as human beings, that we've been taught more or less that everything that is done by human beings are like self-made inventions of our own brains. And what this perspective opens up, based ultimately then on the description that the Maya gave of that cosmic quantum shift, is that we don't just have the sensory experiences of seeing seeing with our eyes, hearing with our ears, and so forth, but we're also downloading information in another way, in the form of geometries or quantum states that our brains will download, and then we will create reality in accordance with those particular structures, these geometric structures that we download at particular times.
So you talk in your books, I mean, you have a number of illustrations that very actually demonstrate, these serpentine waves of the Mayan calendar long count, these, almost 400-year periods, and how you can actually trace back through history the different levels of consciousness, what you call the 9 waves of creation, and how the consciousness evolved in line with these waves over the millennia. Say a little bit about that.
Well, the waves then are, to begin with, another point of departure for going into this worldview that the Maya embraced at one point in time is to look at their pyramids. That typically, not always, but in the major sites of the Maya, the Palenque, Chichen Itza, Mayapan, and others, they built the pyramids in 9 levels, and they are like 9 terraces. And this makes sense if we look upon these terraces as reflecting different quantum states. Quantum theory is really based on the idea that you make leaps, instantaneous leaps between different states. And so it's not a smooth pyramids that they built. They built these staircase-formed pyramids that I believe symbolize then the quantum leaps between the different levels. And then in ancient times, we do know that the shaman kings of these different sites, they would climb to the top of the pyramid, and they would be sort of, much as an Egyptian pharaoh, they would be looked upon as some kind of a divine source, having reached the top level of consciousness. And so each of these levels then represents a way with which the universe creates reality. And they are added, they are added upon each other. So they each build, you start with a foundation of the very simplest forms of amoebas or bacteria and so forth. That's a very simplest form of life. And then on top of that, you create the multicellular organisms, which are animals and plants and so forth. And step by step, you come to more and more advanced levels of consciousness. And at the bottom, you might say, there was then the material reality that was created by the 4 lowest levels. But then when it comes to the 5 and 6, 7, 8, 9, then we're talking about more spiritual or mental levels shaping the evolution of human life. And each of these levels, each of these quantum states is then developed or is transmitted to us by a wave that has its ups and downs, a day and a night, as I would sometimes call it, or you could talk about it as a peak or a valley. So each of these quantum states is transported to us or transmitted to us through waves. And that, I'm convinced, is really then what the ancient peoples would symbolize by serpents. The serpent is the best way you could symbolize any sine wave function, really, if you are living in nature. And so that's the reason then that since this serpent seemed to be what brought civilization, its ups and downs and so forth, is the reason that in Mexico, ancient Mexico, and among the Maya, the most prominent of their deity was what they called the plumed serpent. And most of their pyramids was dedicated exactly to honor this particular bringer of life, bringer of civilization, bringer of wisdom, bringer of calendars. And we may think that, I originally, when I first came to Chichen Itza, I thought that was a strange idea to have a serpent as the highest divinity. But when we look around the world, we go to China and they have their serpentine dragons. We go to Australia and the Aborigines have this rainbow serpent as the major creator god. We find the same theme coming back in many different forms. What makes the Maya stand out in this particular case is that they actually timed these ups and downs of the waves. And so for us now, we have that information, and we can see how it matches up with the actual historical development of our planet that we know from the modern sources, so to speak.
So these waves, they influence the universe, they influence us through holographic resonance with our minds, which are receptors, receivers.
Yeah. that seems to be the case. So each one of them, you might say, they bring to us a geometry, and a geometry that you might say organizes and structures our minds. And what happens when we download them is that the way we perceive reality and the way we recreate reality through the creation of our civilizations with its arts, its science, technology, etc., is determined by the kind of geometric structure that these waves carry to us. And I'd like to give one very clear example of this, and that again refers to the rise of civilization on our planet 5,100 years ago. And that is that prior to that, there really wasn't, in the long time period from about 100,000 years ago, when we can start to see the first symbolic expressions of human beings. The cave paintings will come and so forth. But during that time, up until 5,100 years ago, you really didn't see any geometric structures expressed by human beings. This comes quite suddenly, and a very clear example of these structures, these straight lines and perpendicular lines, are the Egyptian pyramids that were started to be built at the time when this quantum state of geometry was first downloaded. So from that point, I mean, I should mention then, of course, that the Giza pyramid, the famous one there, it's this has this perfect geometry, more or less, incomprehensible actually even for us in a modern time, but it's with an enormously small error. It faces straight to the north, and it's built in as an 8-sided structure, which is then exactly what the nature of the quantum states that the Maya described, that people then started to download. So what we can see is that at that point in time, when people started to download a geometry that was straight and perpendicular, so forth, is that people started to build structures, pyramids, cities, and et cetera, that were had straight line and perpendicular lines that followed a strict geometry. And the way I think that, the origin to these monuments, including the Egyptian pyramids, is that people felt at that time suddenly they got to download a new mind, really, and they were grateful initially. They were happy. They were thankful to the gods that have given them civilizations. And then how to explain that? I mean, you can say that it wasn't really gods, and who knows what gods meant. But it seems clear they attributed their writing, that also started at that time, and also depends on a mind that has a horizontal and vertical structure. If you don't have that kind of a mind where every sign will get a specific meaning because of its location in a vertical horizontal framework, then you have no writing. So the ancient people then, they thank the gods. Thank you for having given us writing. But it wasn't like saying this is how you write an A and this is how you write a B, because we know that these different first civilizations in Egypt, Sumeria, and in the Indus Valley, their actual symbols are different. But at the same time, they came up with the writing at the same time, and the key to that is that they had started to download a mind that was organized through these horizontal and vertical framework that was downloadable at that point in time.
I'm going to hold you there, Carl, because we have to go to break. You're listening to What Is Going On. I'm Sandie Sedgbeer, and my guest today is biologist Carl Johan Calleman, who's a recognised authority on the Mayan calendar, which not only illustrates how the rise and fall of civilizations occur in alignment with precisely timed shifts in human consciousness, but also offers an alternative view of the coronavirus. We'll be back with more from Carl Calleman after this break.
The future of Internet radio is here. OMTimes Radio, IOM FM.
Ascending Hearts is no ordinary dating site, but a spiritual dating site with a purpose, to link you with your soulmate. We engineer the serendipity so you can trust that you will attune with someone that has the same matching vibration as you. Ascending Hearts, the conscious dating site for the spiritually aware. Try Ascending Hearts for free. AscendingHearts.com.
More than 24 million Americans have an autoimmune disorder, and that number continues to grow. I'm Sharon Saylor, and I'm one of those 24 million. To put that number in perspective, cancer affects about 9 million and heart disease up to 22 million. That's why I've brought together top experts and those thriving regardless of their diagnosis to bring you the latest, most up-to-date information. Join me, Sharon Saylor, Friday night, 7 p.m. Eastern, for the Autoimmune Hour on Life Interrupted Radio to find out how to live your life uninterrupted.
Hello, I'm Sandie Sedgbeer, host of OMTimes' flagship radio show, What Is Going On. As a long-time editor, book judge, spiritual magazine publisher and radio host, I've read thousands of books and interviewed hundreds of authors and teachers. So I know what's worth reading and what isn't. Now, with the spiritual book market growing increasingly crowded, more and more people are seeking my help in finding the authentic voices, the empowering tools, and the genuine skip the BS guidance that will make the most difference to their spiritual development. So I decided to make it easier by bringing my knowledge, experience, and considerable network of contacts together in the No BS Spiritual Book Club. There are no ads, no joining fees, no obligations, and no BS. Just an ever-growing library compiled by recognisable and respected names of the 10 best books that help them the most on their journeys, plus free book excerpts, audios and live video interviews where you can quiz them about their spiritual journeys and their 10 best list choices. Your time and money are valuable, your spiritual journey even more so. If you're looking for genuine guidance from people who've walked this path before you, check out Sedgbeer.com. Click on the No BS Spiritual Book Club tab and join the club. That's Sedgbeer.com, SEDGBEER.com. I'll see you there.
A social distancing tip.
Putting distance between yourself and others is critical to slowing the spread of coronavirus. So here are ways to stay in contact without the physical contact part. Call, send a text, set up a video conference, post on social media, dedicate a song on the radio. If you have symptoms of fever, dry cough, and shortness of breath, call your healthcare provider before going to their office. For more info, visit coronavirus.gov.
Let's all do our part, because we're all #alone together. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Welcome back. Carl Calleman, in your books you illustrate how these waves of consciousness, if we call them that, the gap between them has reduced over the millennia and has got smaller and smaller, and we've had in our lifetime probably something like 2 or 3, maybe even more, I think, 2 or 3, I think it is, the 7th, the 8th, and recently in 2011 we had the 9th wave, and that was activated, which has triggered, you say, an accelerated push in so many ways, a rise in awareness of unity consciousness, access to the full power of all 9 waves of creation. Tell us more about how this 9th wave is affecting us, and how does it integrate with the other waves that we're also being impacted by?
Yeah, so, maybe I should first say that this model that I'm presenting, or the model that anyone has proposed for the rise of civilization, it's not just a matter of theoretical dispute. It really is something that has very, very profound consequences for how we relate to life, how we relate to the somewhat critical situation that our civilization is going through at the current time. Because the consequences for how you look upon the rise of civilization will be vast in how to relate to it. So this is an important question. And as you point out, there is this whole range, and I talked overview earlier about the 9 waves of creation, and they have been activated sequentially according to a certain mathematical pattern, so that after this original rise of civilization 3,100 years ago, then there came a new wave, the 7th wave on the 7th level of the pyramid, that activated the Industrial Revolution, first beginning in the British Isles, of course, but then spreading across the world. Each wave, it starts somewhere, and you get the first embryonic expressions, and then over time they will go out to cover the world, essentially wherever it is possible, and the conditions are appropriate for manifesting it. And then came on top of that came in 1999 came the digital revolution. The internet had been around for a few years, but then you're really getting this smart technology, the interactive internet, and so forth, and it begins on this new world, you might say, is created that we're living in, with everything is being digitalized and communication is done through the internet and so forth. That's another expression of one of these quantum states. And then finally, the last one of these levels was activated. The 9th wave was activated in the year 2011, and I should come back to the remarkable fact that there is a inscription from the ancient Maya, the so-called Tortuguero monument number 6. Which actually describes what would happen in that time, 2011, 2012, and it says that that's the time when, as they expressed this 9-storied entity would appear in his full regalia. They talk about this structure as a deity, you might say. Everything in those days were looked upon as living spirits. And but the point is to see that only at that point in time all the 9 waves were activated, and this is what the ancient Mayas said about 700 AD about what would happen in our own time. And that doesn't automatically mean that everyone has downloaded this new 9th wave, but it does mean that it is now available, it's now accessible. And some of you might have listened to this seminar that I and Patricia Albert had the other day, and where she talked about how she started to experience that a new level of consciousness became accessible at that point in time. And then, of course, what I'm bringing to the party is the understanding of the Mayan calendar, how there is a build-up of different levels. And this 9th level, the 9th wave, the top level of the pyramid, it brings a number of new phenomena as far as we can gather, because it really doesn't have those kind of structured geometry that I mentioned that the the sixth wave that created civilization. It had a very strict geometry. Everything was compartmentalized. Every phenomenon became a separate phenomenon, you might say. And you might say, if you study how these different quantum states have built up unto the current time, you can see that they go through a process from developing unity through separation and then back to unity. And this coming back to unity is then really brought by the ninth wave. And I would say it's a very small minority that as yet has started to download this particular wave. I hope many more people are seeking out what it entails and the nature of this wave, because if you look upon the universe as a nine-storied structure with higher and higher levels of consciousness, then it looks like the only conclusion that you can draw, including from this Tortuguero monument in Mexico, is that the ninth level is what's all striving for. The whole creation is striving for us human beings to get back into that state of unity, to transcend the separation that has been necessary in order to create civilizations and so forth. So at this point, I think, and I also want to say that you don't make a quantum leap to another level of consciousness by just continuing on the same way that you were coming from. And here it's really a case where we go from a me focus to a we focus. And we can understand that because there really isn't any veils in this ninth wave quantum state that creates separation. So it's a unifying. It's not just two individuals unifying. I develop a relationship with somebody else and we get unified in that sense. Because even then, it's still I who will be the focus of it. It's the we. It's another state that you can only come to through a quantum state where we're accessing this unity directly from the source, what the Maya would talk about as the place of creation, the center of the universe with the world tree and so forth. So we're just beginning to see this, and the reality that we see now, people are different. They're approaching this crisis very differently because depending on what quantum states they have developed resonance with, they will approach it differently. For instance, if you have developed a very strong resonance with the sixth wave that creates a yin-yang duality, you will continue to sort of create racism around you. You will continue to create separation around you, etc., etc. You will continue to think that the world should be divided between those that are privileged and those that are not privileged, between those that are rulers and those that are not rulers. And so it really, this kind of civilization of that we're living in still has inherited much of the separation and the dominance that came out of the past 5,000 years of the sixth wave. And this is not human nature. It is humans downloading a particular wave, a particular quantum state. And if we're going to successfully get out of this, we will have to go up to higher levels of consciousness, especially the 8th and the 9th wave. And the 9th wave then helps us transcend the dualities, the separations, the dominance, and so forth that were created by the 6th wave in particular. And just 1 second. So from that state of consciousness of unity, people will just naturally see the we unity in everything and develop a relationship of love and care for everything, for others as well as for nature and so forth.
And this is definitely what we've been seeing. I mean, you talk about, around 2012, everybody was expecting, everything to suddenly become wonderful. We were going to start the golden age, and a lot of people felt it didn't happen. But what has happened, and I think we've all noticed this, is that there has been a kind of massive an awakening taking place with people suddenly changing. I mean, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, people wouldn't have responded to, the current events in the way that they're responding to them today. And even the terminology, people waking up, leaping consciousness, seeing through the veils, it's all echoing exactly what you've said.
Yeah.
Well, we'll come back to this after the break, because we have to go to another break now, Carl. You're listening to What is Going On. I'm Sandie Sedgbeer, and I'm speaking with world-renowned scientist and recognised authority on the Mayan calendar, Dr. Carl Johan Calleman. And we're talking about his latest book, Quantum Science of Psychedelics, the Pineal Gland, Multidimensional Reality, and Mayan Cosmology. We'll be back with more after the break.
The cutting edge of conscious radio, OMTimes Radio, IOM FM. Being a radio host on IOM FM allows you to build your show on a rich platform with the power of the internet to fulfill your outreach goals and connect with a very specialized and global online audience, unlimited by time and distance. OMTimes Radio will provide you with web relevance, a recognizable conscious brand, and with the standard of excellence that has accompanied every single OMTimes endeavor. Host your show with OMTimes Radio Network.
Hello, I'm Lisa Berry. Join me every Monday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time for Light on Living, a chance to see new, hear different, and feel more as I shine the spotlight on all the ways to lighten the load of life's challenges. Light on Living is your link to that new way you're looking for, that new understanding that will enhance your life, and that positive connection that will support your growth. So join me and you'll gain insight and start to see things in a new way that motivates you.
I am Fidel Nshambo. I was born in a city called the Bukavu in the Congo. We were a loving family, and then, boom, everything that I had disappeared in a single day. People think that when you are a refugee and they resettle you to America and all your problems are done. They don't understand that that's the beginning of everything. I was not born a refugee. I was made one.
It's time we welcome refugee families with open arms. Learn more at embracerefugees.org, brought to you by the Ad Council.
Welcome back. Dr. Carl Calleman, in your book, Quantum Science of Psychedelics, the pineal gland, you talk about multidimensional reality, you talk about Mayan cosmology, you talk about so much. The book is an absolutely fascinating read. We can't even begin to cover it here. But, of course, if we look at the subtitle of it and the title, you suggest that psychedelics might be the key to altering human evolution and might show us how we can participate in co-creating our evolutionary future. And it's not just psychedelics, because, I mean, meditation alters the brain, we know that. So say a bit more about that.
Yeah, I think, well, it's important, the last thing you're saying there. And I think one of the conclusions that I draw in the book is that by no means would psychedelics be the only path. But what I'm trying to make the case, and I think I do it fairly thoroughly, is that the various modalities that we have in order to, what should I say, open our minds. Disengage our minds is actually a better word, but say meditations or breath works or psychedelics or a number of others, Kundalini yoga maybe, and a couple of other things. They are just variations of a theme. It's not like we can say psychedelics is something entirely different from these sort of non-substance-induced states. They are variations of a theme, and psychedelics, I believe, has a possible place in that. And the reason, and I don't think it's in the use of any of those are still within the framework of the individual raising his or her consciousness. It doesn't take us all the way, I think, to the state of the ninth wave, but it prepares for it, and it prepares for it in the way that I talked earlier about how lower waves would endow us with veils for our perception, and that's a typical expression by shamans also that are practicing psychedelic plants and so forth. It's that they help us go beyond the veils. And if you look at the different quantum states of the 9 levels, you will find that the 6th and the 7th and the 8th, they all have veils that prevents us from being totally receptive to the cosmic center and the information that is coming from that. So this, in this book, I also make more direct comparisons with the possible effects of meditation and psychedelics, and it comes down to the same thing, that this structured geometric mind that some would call the reducing valve. That's what Aldous Huxley, this British pioneer of psychedelics, would talk about. That this mind, this geometric mind that creates structure and compartmentalizes reality, and for that reason have been very effective in creating civilization. Now I would say we shouldn't continue on that path. It's more like, how do we open ourselves up to, how do we disengage this reducing valve? How do we reduce this geometric compartmentalization of our brains in such a way that we become receptive and totally open to those waves, in particular then the 9th wave, that I believe is the future of humanity. And so it comes in here, these different modalities of individual spiritual evolution. They may prepare us to take this step, but there is one more quantum leap that would be required, I think. I have developed my thinking a little bit since I wrote the book, in particular in that regard, that these practices, these spiritual practices, they prepare us for the final quantum step, but that they don't quite take us there.
But if there are 9 levels of the pyramids, and 9 waves of creation, then that implies that this 9th one is the last one, the final one, probably. Yeah. What happens if we choose not to move towards that? If we stay in that 8th wave of consciousness, will we just destroy ourselves?
Yeah, I would suspect so, to be honest with you. I would suspect so. I mean, if you're not following the path that we're supposed to, at least as I understand it. Who knows if I'm wrong? I don't think so myself, because it's based on such a massive empirical basis, so to speak. But that's what I would guess. I may be wrong, but that's what I would think. Yes.
Well, you wrote a piece, a really good article about COVID, an alternative view of COVID, and you talked about this being a wonderful opportunity. I mean, there are so many good things in this. I'm hearing people say, yes, they're worried about their jobs, or, will they keep their home? But on the upside, they've discovered, the joy of spending time with their children, of not having to rush around every day, getting to know their partners, reconnecting, with neighbours. And this is a wonderful opportunity for us to experience the we instead of the me.
Yeah, I agree.
So is it, I mean, clearly there is an interplay going on between us and the waves, and they're informing us and we're informing it. Is it that, as some people suggest, that in our souls we have put out a call for something like this to help us stop and press a reset button? I mean, would you go along with that, or is that just fantasy?
I would say that it could function that way. I don't think we created this. I did not predict that this coronavirus would come at this particular time, but I did, actually several years ago, I did have the sense, without talking about it publicly, I did have the sense that something like this would be coming, and I started to make my own garden and stuff like that, because I could see that there were what should I say, phenomena on the horizon that would put everything in question. Now I forgot your.
Well, it's interesting that, this is the time. I mean, we've got climate change, we've got, such separation and division, rising authoritarianism, there's rampant nationalism instead of globalism. Everything is coming together at once, and it does seem rather synchronous that COVID comes along and gives us the opportunity to stop and survey. I mean, we're getting the evidence that, the ozone layer is clearing in places because there's less pollution. Right. I mean, on every level, we are seeing the error of our ways.
Yeah. Well, so in a certain way, the kind of changes that happen are perfectly predictable, even if as I said, I did not predict exactly when this would come. Something I did predict, and something I had talked about, is that we went into what is called a night, a valley, so to speak, and what happens in those valleys, in this case of the sixth wave, is that everything slows down. If you look at his history as it has unfolded, it alternates between this time period of civilizational forward movements, when all kinds of new creativity goes on, and people are kind of hyped and going constantly on a high speed. And then it alternates with these downturns where things slow down. History simply rests, and there are not that many innovations coming along human beings. And so since we now have gone into, at least on the level of the seventh wave, we've gone into that kind of a downturn, into a valley, you might say, it's completely predictable, and something I had said, that history will slow down. And that is what is happening. And I certainly hope that everybody uses it not only to develop and deepen their personal relationships with the close ones that they live with, but also that they also take a look and use this time in order to more deeply understand what is going on in the cosmos and where it's all meant to go.
Yeah. I was looking at your website and I came across a message that somebody had left in response to one of your articles. And they were saying that, you talk about how those born into a particular wave resonate strongly with that wave. And those born into higher levels of consciousness will respond to that particular wave. And this person said that their children born since 2011 and from here on in will resonate with the highest wave of unity consciousness, one would imagine. So the older they get, the more they'll replace those of a lower vibratory consciousness, which I would imagine gives some comfort that, there is a very strong possibility, that we will reach the place where we will be able to move forward into that ninth wave more fully.
Yeah, I think so. I think in the year 2031, this generation that was born fully into a time when the ninth wave was accessible, in the year 2031 they will grow, they will reach maturity and come of age. And there are several phenomena that it will go into too much detail about the Mayan calendar that indicate that there are, for instance, a bigger opportunity to go back to global collaboration at that point in time, and people then will come of age, and there are several things that indicate that up until that we will have to go through a quite difficult time. That's what I believe anyway, especially maybe the next 2 or 3 years. But then there is that time when for a number of reasons the cosmic interference pattern will provide for the possibility of a more harmonious planet. I don't think, I don't want to give the message that this will happen automatically. People will have to have a focus on actually creating this and transcending national boundaries and these kind of things, which are not popular ideas at the current time. But they will come back, and that is the future, I hope.
Last weekend, as you mentioned, you presented a free webinar with Patricia Albert, and I attended that, and it's absolutely fascinating, and it does lay out a lot of what you've said, but in much more detail, and we get to see the charts as well. Is the recording of that seminar still available to anybody?
Yes.
And good. Yes. And if so, tell our listeners where they can get it.
Oh, okay. I think the best way of getting it is it will be available until the end of this month. And I certainly welcome very much that people listen to it and think about it and see how they feel about it and if they see the future coming from this kind of an initiative. I think my own website is right now under construction and it's a little bit uncertain. So I would recommend that the listener goes to Evolutionary Collective, which is Patricia's web page, and there they will find how to listen to this seminar. It's available until to the end of the month. So Evolutionary Collective is her web page. My own web page is calleman.com, CALLEMAN.com, and we're still working on sort of updating things because things are moving quite quickly in this area right now.
Absolutely, yeah. One last very quick question, and I'm going to need a very quick answer. So, what happens when we're all aligned with the ninth wave? I mean, will the world be wonderful, and then does the process start all over again, or do we continue on into infinity, evolving and growing and becoming more and more conscious?
Yeah, I think it's basically the last. I don't think things will start again, so to speak, unless there is a new universe created somewhere else. I don't think either that we come to some kind of a static situation, because there will always be shifts in these waves, and even if we will come to a point where our predominant resonance will be with the ninth wave and its unity and its love and so forth, we will still be affected by the underlying shifts, and so things will happen. It will not end. It's just that we may come to a more harmonious overview or over situation, you might say.
Carl Calleman, it's been a delight to speak with you again. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, thank you so much, Sandie. Thank you for having this.
Good. I look forward to the next book. You're listening to What is Going On. You can find out more about Carl Calleman's work at his website when it's up again, calleman.com. If you want to watch that webinar, and I heartily recommend it, go to theevolutionarycollective.com, and of course the book we've been discussing is Quantum Science of Psychedelics. I'm Sandie Sedgbeer. I'll be back next week at the same time. I hope you'll join me then. Till then, it's goodbye from me.